Right, because counter battery, that's a huge thing.
There's some counter battery and just like drones, now with the drone warfare, like you don't
Right,
necessarily want to be on a weapon system anymore. It's crazy
right.
seeing what's going on in Ukraine and how they're using drones and stuff like that, and kind of how warfare is like shaping. I mean, that's started with us really in like Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, we had drones like the little throw bots and stuff like that, that you could like throw
Right.
over a wall that would drive around with a camera on it. I don't know if you were there in that time frame when those were coming out, but the EOD guys had robots, and then they came out with Switchblade. I remember the
Yep.
last few years, Switchblade was something that SOCOM guys started using, and
Yeah, that's those tactical loitering munitions are great. They really, I know that the Naval Special Warfare use those a lot. I spoke with some of the folks in that world, and they love it
yeah,
because it is a self-contained tactical loitering munition, and they achieve a lot of effects with them. You
yeah.
know, um, yeah, you're able to you're PIDing it as as it's loitering, and then your battle damage assessment is real time
Yeah.
because you got a feed.
And that seems like it was like the not I don't know, the real first integration of like tactical drone warfare against the enemy, and now it's like swap to these. I have a DJI drone over there on the shelf, and
Right.
they go online and buy what's marketed as a engagement ring dropping mechanism. So it's supposed to be for like maybe a photographer or something is
Yeah.
photographing a wedding, and now but it's the specifications on it are perfect also for a grenade, to hold a grenade, and that's what
Can
they've
I
been using.
here? Let me grab something. I'm going to show you real quick. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you should know. You got all the drone shit.
So this is UAV2, and these two here, these are marker beacons,
Mm-hmm.
and these can be dropped and remotely activated. See the light? And so it's not dropping hand grenades, but you can surveil. I don't have the sensor package on the front of it, but you can fly it, land it, drop a marker beacon, land somewhere else, drop a second marker beacon, and this right here is a marker beacon, infrared or visible, whatever you want, and then you've got three targets
Is there any way
marked.
to drop it without landing it?
Yeah, you can, but you want to be precise. You want to put it right on. You can drop it as far as it's just a simple, like that.
Yeah.
So, and but that's one of my developments. And
That's
then
cool.
it's you got it's made. Put a battery right there, but I mean it's made to strap on whatever you want. It's Marine Corps ready.
Nice.
But that's I mean I know they've been doing munitions delivery, but it's not really that effective. It's much better to use small, what I call SUMID, small unmanned multi-domain systems, or small UAS. When the domain is the air, because this really is air and ground. It's multi-domain. These are much better. The next generation is, which the Marine Corps is great at doing, and other components of the U.S. military are great at doing. Other countries not so much, is true multi-domain combined arms synergized integration. That's really hard, really, really hard. And so once you get that mindset down, which the Marine Corps has, and you integrate these systems where you're not just getting real quick and dirty ISR, passive ISR with the sensor that you have on it, but you're actually actively integrating that into the situational awareness build. You're optimizing situational awareness through these visual mechanisms like marker beacons and Sparkle. This is a ground robot, and you can see the actual the business end of it. There's a camera, there's a laser, and then there's a visible illuminator and a infrared illuminator. So it's basically a remote PEC 16.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That's cool.
so that's for the ground. But when you're integrating these active and passive mechanisms for, situational awareness enhancement and optimization, and you're able to maintain your signature, your optimized signature, basically you're in a cover position. When you have air on station, when you're integrated in a true multi-domain situation that the Marines are masters of, you don't have to go out and drop a hand grenade. You can just mark the target, and you can use a much more appropriate weapon system. It's engaged from like a Cobra or an F-35.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that is to me, that's the next step.
Yeah, I was talking to a few episodes ago. I was talking to Brian Russell, who is my CO at 1st Anglico, an artillery officer. After he left there and went through his war college time, he got sent over to U.S. Cybercom, and he was talking about some of this stuff. He's like, how the battlefield shaping and stuff like that works. Obviously, in general terms.
Phase zero shaping is huge.
But it's interesting, he's like, why drop a 500-pound bomb on an individual weapon system when I can just hack into their network and go bloop and turn it off? He's like, you don't have to worry about the collateral damage there. And I was like, well, yeah.
The problem with that is battle damage assessment. How do you know it's turned off?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it doesn't fire, but that's almost
I agree with that, and I agree with that in concept. The issue is that real-time BDA, that fluid, that flow of the operational flow from phase zero all the way through till you're exfilling. You want to see exactly, and the farther you want to see exactly how it's going to proceed, and things are always going to change, as you know. And that's one of the great things about these systems that have been developed and that continue to be developed, is that, and what they allow that much greater, much tighter integration, multi-domain integration, and you're able to not just engender effects that you're what you directly see. You're opening it up. You're opening up your influence to other tactical components of an operation and to the greater operational scheme of maneuver. And so with something like disabling a weapon system, as things are going along, you could say, well, we have 90% certainty that through TCP/IP packet, in malware infestation or something, whatever the hell they call it, we have a 90% certainty we're going to be able to disable that MLRS, but we want 100%.
Yeah.
But we have a collateral damage estimate where, maybe for whatever tactical reason at the time, they don't want to use like a GBU-31 to completely obliterate the area. They may be able to use, mark a target remotely for optimized situational awareness for an inbound mixed section, Huey Cobra mixed section. I guess now it would be a Zulu Yankee mixed section, and then hit it with a rocket or something like that. So it's done because you have BDA on, you have visual BDA of that MLRS is disabled, is knocked out. So
yeah, definitely I think it's definitely a time and place. Just another tool in the toolbox kind of deal.
Right.
Do you care if I keep any of that in, or throw in extra content? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I thought we were doing that. I thought that what we were doing right now. I'll talk about.
Well, I wasn't sure because what we were talking about at the beginning, I wasn't sure what all you wanted to.
I'll talk about all this stuff. In fact, we can even talk about some of the stuff in Ukraine. Like, it's interesting that the magic of effective warfare, modern effective warfare, is an effective multi-domain combined arms architecture, like they do at 29 Palms, like they demonstrate at 29 Palms. Mm-hmm. There's no single weapon system like an F-16 today. Like, well, our F-16 is going to turn the tide for Ukraine. Is the Abrams tank going to turn the tide for Ukraine? No individual weapon system is ever going to turn the tide unless it's an all-out strategic nuclear, back and forth, and whoever has the biggest ones or the most, effective ones, or effectively placed ones are going to win. But we don't worry about that because that will probably never happen. But in a situation like Ukraine and Russia, it's the ability of the warfighters to integrate those different components together for synergized effects synergized tactical effects that in aggregate engender operational end states that they're looking for. No F-16, no Abrams, no UAV, nothing individually is going to do it. It's how they put it all together. And that's something that people don't understand, that that I see when I see these articles that are written on whatever news source. They don't get into that. And it's hard to even understand unless you go out to the Quackenbush, in 29 Palms, where, or any of these 100 series ranges down there where they do combined arms, live fire combined arms. And you can see it like, wow, this is how it happens. Okay, they're doing artillery, they're doing mortars, they're shutting this down. There's a mixed section coming in. And then, the maneuver element's moving, and then you really get to see how that is what wins battles.
Yeah.
Multi-domain combined arms integration.
And the other thing,
synergized tactical effects that engender operational end states.
The other thing too is that like the experience behind it. We can send you a bunch of tanks, but what we got to train you on how to drive it, fix it, operate it, employ it tactically, and that comes like the basic schools for the military are usually 6 months or less for most of these weapon systems. But that doesn't mean that person that's only been on it for 6 months knows how to use it like fully or there's like experience gained over time. So even adding a bunch of different types of, like you said, F-16s, tanks, UAVs, that's all good and well, but unless you know how to employ it, two, integrate it, then it's going to be way less effective than the people are hoping for. It's definitely a learned thing.
When that war kicked off, it totally boggles my mind. I'm not covering it. I'm not in it. I don't understand. But from just an outsider's perspective, I have no idea why he did that. I mean, it is such utter insanity that they did it. That's a strategic view. Like, I don't understand. This is strategically insane. But I was looking at it from a clinical tactical standpoint, and I was laughing. I'm like, these Russians, they could use 28-day training evolution at 29 Palms with the Marines because they do not know how to do combined arms. They don't know how to do it.
Well, they're still doing their whole they're just clearing entire areas with artillery and then trying to march over it, and that's just it's a meat grinder.
It's not maneuver warfare. It's attrition warfare. It's not, and then the Ukrainians come in and they're cobbling together combined arms architectures that are effective, and they're achieving multiple tactical effects, and so they're repelling this onslaught by the Russians. I mean, I just have a limited view of it. I'm not over there, but from what I can see, that's pretty evident to me. But I think it speaks to the greater picture, the greater topic of if you're going to be engaged tactically for these, you have stated operational end states. This is what we want to do. We want to seize the airfield. We want to take that island, or if it's a coin environment, we want to pacify. You want to make sure the populace is aligned with the government of Afghanistan or whatever specific outlook you want to achieve. You need an effective multi-domain, fully integrated combined arms architecture. Combined arms can be an M16. It can be a swarm of UAVs. It can be artillery. It could be individuals going out and engaging the populace with leaflets. I mean, a combined arms doesn't necessarily mean a classic weapon system. It's just, you were talking about cyber, which in my outlook is part of the information domain. It's a subdomain of information. TCP/IP packets are information, digital information. But you've got, it's a really great, for very few things, this war is horrible, but it's a great illustration of, you mentioned training, of why training is so incredibly important, and to train an effective combined arms force like the Marine Corps to make sure that they are functioning at their optimized capability as a combined arms fighting force. Like the MAGTF, what they call the MAGTF, the Air Ground Task Force, which is really not an air ground task force. It's a multi-domain task force, because it's not just air assets and ground assets. It's just multi-domain integration. When a MAGTF functions optimally, and they typically do after they're trained, that's why it's such a great, effective fighting system at the operational and a tactical level.
From what I've heard, from people that are still in, and from like the FD 2030 kind of stuff that's going on, they are definitely working more to put information people down, intelligence people that can do the information warfare. IO, information operations, has been considered a, what do they call it? A non-kinetic fires for a long time. Artillery officers really, when I was in Afghanistan in 2011, my fire support officer got pulled to go do the IO stuff, which means he was helping create radio messages for radio in the box. For those that know what those are, little hand crank radios. We'd hand them out to the Afghans, and then we'd play music and whatever, and then they would send out messages like, "Hey, you can come here and collect water." Hey, and then they, I think, put out like a phone number, a tip line, like, "Hey, if you want to call and leave a tip, whatever, do so." And people would do that. It was actually pretty interesting to see that kind of thing. But I think the Marine Corps has been trying to integrate that into operational planning for a while.
They have,
and they seem like it's pretty successful as well.
Well, the other thing too is, what is information? A Harrier or an F-35 doing a show of force, that's information. That's projecting the information that we have kinetic capability right here, right now. So it's just, I'm not involved in doctrine writing, and I haven't been covering Marine Corps operations in some time, but clearly explaining the information domain and how it's wielded, and what types of advantages it can produce in a combined arms construct. That's definitely, I really, the whole point is, once the maneuver element gets to a target, there's not going to be any fighting in a combined arms construct, because everything's been disabled. I mean, you've completely, all their anti-air systems are done. Their any type of their communications are down. Their logistical capabilities are down. And information is part of that. I mean, if you can, I mean, how great would it be if an enemy they didn't want them to see it, but can understand the capabilities of a Marine Expeditionary Unit, a battalion landing team who's just trained at 29 Palms, and they are deployed, and something pops up. We're sending the 15th MEU over with BLT 18 or whatever it may be, and we let the enemy know, hey, guess what? This battalion of Marines, battalion landing force, battalion landing team's showing up, and they're like, well, okay, I guess this wasn't such a great idea after all. We give up. That information just won that without any type of kinetic engagement.
Yeah, what's the old adage that like an aircraft carrier is like something, however many acres of American diplomacy, like floating American diplomacy.
Right.
Yeah. Let's back up a little bit and talk. So I never really formally introduced you yet, Derek. I really appreciate it. I heard about, so I first was introduced to your work in like 2009. I was in Iraq, and I read Lone Survivor. I picked it up at a USO off the shelf, and I was like, man, this is a great book. And then I think in doing some research about it, about the events and stuff, I came across your book, Victory Point, and where I read that, and I was like, oh, well, this is like the other side of the story. This adds so much more context to everything that was in Lone Survivor. I think it's a good companion for people to read and kind of consider both. And so, and it got brought back up the other day. I was on Instagram, and there was like some page talking about Lone Survivor and whatever happened on the ground there. There was some like debate in the comments. And I always, anytime someone brings up Lone Survivor, I always tell them like, hey, read Victory Point. It's a good counter, or not counter, but like I said, add context to. Well,
it gives it accurately portrays Operation Red Wings.
So and that's when I decided to reach out to you. That since I brought it up again. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna see if this guy's on Instagram. So I reached out, and you were, and again, I really appreciate you coming on. It's really cool to talk to you, considering, like I said, I've read your book and recommended it so many times. Let's talk before we get into, Red Wings and Whalers and all that. Let's talk about how did you get into being an embedded writer? How did you get into writing itself? And then how did that lead you into writing in the military?
So my work with the military is fairly broad. I am a writer, a photographer, and I've also done work as a systems developer and integrator in small tactical systems, small unmanned systems. As a writer and as a photographer, those always went hand in hand with me. This started going all the way back to my college years. I started being a writer and a photographer. Actually, before that, I wanted to, I explored the mountains and desert areas, and I started writing about them and publishing articles and publishing lots of photographs through agencies and directly with magazines. And that was a big part of my life for many years. And then in 2005, I had the opportunity to visit the Mountain Warfare Training Center, the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center, one of my favorite places in the whole world. I've spent a lot of time there subsequently, and it's a very important base. It was started in 1951 as a result of the Chosin retrograde campaign with the Marines who had to retrograde away from the Chosin Reservoir during the Korean War, and they needed a place to train Marines who were headed to the Korean Peninsula in cold weather and mountainous operations. So that's why they stood that base up, and it has since become an extremely important component of the Department of Defense because it's a joint training area. It's a service level training area now, and and so I spent 2 weeks there in 2005, and I met the battalion that was training there at the time, their pre-deployment workup, 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Marine Regiment, and they invited me to come with them to Afghanistan. They were deploying to RC East, Regional Command East, which comprised the Kunar province. And while I was there, they didn't tell me this, they were planning what had initially been Operation Stars, and then they changed it to Operation Red Wings. And it was a Marine Corps operation, and it ended up involving special operations personnel because of a mandate to, if they wanted special operations aviation support, they had to have a special operations ground component. So anyway, I covered that in detail in the book Victory Point.
Yeah, I remember that portion of it specifically, that like the whole thing was a Marine mission. They already had a team ready to go do the same mission that the SEALs did. And that the big thing was, hey, we need this dedicated air support, and the only way to get the dedicated air support is to bring in the special operations guys. Unless you have that, it's all going to be on call. So meaning that it may not be there, if needed, kind of deal. Yeah, it's what's it like for an outsider when you first embed into like an infantry battalion? It's got to be such an alien world for you, not having gone through the indoctrination of boot camp and everything like everybody else. What's that like to step in and be like, oh, this is how these animals live?
Oh, it was easy for me because my introduction to the Marine Corps was in the mountains, and I'd spent a lot of time in the mountains as a climber and as a photographer, mountaineer, really, up in Alaska and the Yukon and California. And I loved it. And the Marines were having a great time. I mean, I shouldn't say they're having a great time. They're professional. They were not complaining. They were focused. They were on task, and I just got along with them in training. And they said, "Well, why don't you come with us to Afghanistan?" So, all right, okay, I will. And then I ended up selling my house and that whole life with a dog and a girlfriend and all that, and that ended. And so then but then in that it was that spring, it was March that I went to NWTC, and then in the months that followed, I retrograded my life at the time, and I integrated, and I went into I followed Marines at the Summer Mountain Leader Course in 2005, the summer there, and then I flew to Afghanistan, and then I went out to. I didn't know where I was going.
Yeah.
And I thought I was just going to be sitting in a big Ford operating base, and they had different plans. They sent me to the Camp Blessing, which they call the tip of the spear, and it was way out there. Got mortared and rocketed all the time, and I ended up embedding with 1st Platoon, Echo 1, 1st Platoon of Company E, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment, and with the platoon commander, Pat. He's a good friend of mine to this day. I said, well, I'm going to be staying here at this base, right? He goes, nope, you're coming with us, or you're going home. You're coming outside the wire with us, or we're sending you back. So I was like, okay. And it was, I think, not one day, but maybe 2 days later, I got on a Chinook start. There was an operation there to find the location of a mortar system that had been used a day or two before I arrived that was used to kill a Marine on the base there. So, but from the time that I arrived to the time we loaded in the Chinooks, they showed me the basic infantry weapon systems, how to shoot an M16, and those things. And I was embedded when I was living the life.
What an interesting opportunity. I mean, that's like, I think that's a time where the military was giving reporters and stuff unparalleled access to guys, to be able to go down to the platoon level and go on missions. That wasn't really much of a thing before. I don't know. Go ahead.
My experience was unique, and it was forged by being at the Mountain Warfare Training Center, because I everything from learning about how to eat an MRE to really basic discipline things like light discipline at night. So I was prepped for it. Mm-hmm. I wasn't. I shouldn't say I was as prepped for it as somebody who doesn't know anything about the military could possibly be.
Yeah.
And then once I got there, they're like, "Okay, we're going to teach you how to shoot." They're like, "You know how to shoot an M16, right?" And I was like, "I've never even held one." And they said, "Okay, well here you go. We're going to show you the basics." And I ended up shooting an M16 in combat.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's crazy.
Yeah. I think it's been so many years now, it's okay to say that.
I was going to say, I don't know if that's legal.
Well, I don't know either. But, I did it. And we were getting ambushed. And there was the opportunity to shoot back with an M16. So I took that opportunity. Got behind a rock and shot.
Yeah. It's not like they're not going to shoot you if they could,
Well, they tried to. It was my fault for the ambush, or at least where we got ambushed, because I was taking pictures. I really hate to admit this, but I'm going to, with a flash on my camera to do fill flash, and it was one valley over from where the ambush of the Navy SEALs in Operation Red Wings occurred. And then it wasn't that long afterwards I heard the snapping sounds. And when you hear whizzing, they're more than 6 inches above your head. When they're snapping, they're 6 inches to about your head. And I heard the snapping. So they're using me as the initial aim point. And then I didn't know what was going on, because you hear it first, and you hear the explosion, or the sound from the muzzle. And then I realized we're getting shot at. So,
yeah, that's crazy.
It was a nobody got hurt. I got scratched from diving, but that was an interesting experience. So I definitely had as much of the experience as you can possibly have. I had it. Mm-hmm. So that was 18 years.
Yeah. Like I said, that interesting time. It was also pre-surge in Afghanistan, and a lot of Marines forget, we weren't just in Helmand before the surge that they gave the Marines Helmand by itself. The Marines were all over the country doing different tasks, from having a battalion there, like you're talking about, to having advisor teams and stuff like that.
Well, there's ETTs, embedded training teams, and they had been there. The 26 MU, I believe it was 26. Was it 15? I don't even think there is a 26 MU. Maybe I'm mixing up.
Yeah, 26 is on the East Coast, 15's on the West Coast.
I can't remember what MU it was. I think it was a 26 MU, but they were Marines in Afghanistan since the kickoff. But in terms of a coordinated, large footprint presence, That started, I think, around 2004, and it was the Third Marine Regiment. They rotated 3-3, 2-3, 1-3. So that's how that rotation went in RC East. 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, and after they were done, they came back. They had a month off. Then they did their PTPOIF for Iraq prep, and 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, they were in their PTP, their pre-deployment training. They're getting information fed back to them from 3-3, and so that's how that cycle went. So they cycled through RC East, and they cycled through AO Denver, which was Anbar Province, Western Iraq. So 3-3, 2-3, 1-3, 3-3, 2-3, 1. That's how it went between OEF and OIF.
Nice. So let's talk about landing on the ground, and what were like the conditions you guys got when you guys got there. What was the battalion's objective? Was there an overall objective, or are they just trying to make presence at this time? How established was the area?
Are you talking about in Camp Blessing and RC East?
Yeah, when you guys dropped in, when you went in with 2-3, and then wherever you went after that, what was the objective?
So I was only with 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines in Afghanistan in 2005 for a couple months, maybe not even 2 months. They deployed their ADVON in April 2005. The ADVON's Advanced Echelon in April, and then their main element showed up and they swapped the guide on, I think, around late May, early June. And their objective was like every single Marine objective ever, which was to win in history. And winning, the definition of winning, was the continued disruption of ACM activity, any coalition militia activity, which at the time comprised 22 distinct groups. There was Al-Qaeda, Taliban, HIG, I believe the Haqqani network was operating there, but we'll just use the blanket term Taliban that were there. It was just to disrupt their activity, and their activity was just to disrupt the enablement of government of Afghanistan that we were trying to stand up. Operation Enduring Freedom, there were different parts to it. We won OEF within a matter of weeks. That was a very kinetic part of it. We just completely smashed Al-Qaeda and the Taliban's ability to organize, train, equip, finance, and launch attacks against the United States and our allies and our interest overseas. We won that, boom, quick. Then we embarked on this journey to rebuild Afghanistan in a way that we thought would engender a country that would be amicable, not only amicable to the United States and our allies and our interests, but actively inimical to any outside threat to us. So the Taliban can never move in, Al-Qaeda can never move in. And that's a much tougher objective. Mm-hmm. And I think that we achieved that because we never had another 9/11 attack. I think a lot of people I observed that many journalists and many people, unfortunately, they say, well, we lost that, and it's evidenced by the retrograde of a couple of years ago. But my point is, well, they didn't want to just have one 9/11. They wanted to have many of them until we were brought down to our knees, and that didn't happen. And I traced that, you can say, well, all right, well, Afghanistan is not the country that's reflective of the United States the way we are, but there has been no attacks launched, and we'll see if there are any, going forward. But at that time period, this is 20 years ago, at that time period, we'd quickly crushed their capability to operate to attack us or our interests overseas, and now we wanted to nation build. That's the term, or that was the term, nation build, counterinsurgency. And so we had this SOF, Special Operations Forces in Afghanistan at the time. Their focus was counterterror, CT. So they wanted to go after individual cells. A lot of times it was kinetic raids, hard hits, direct action, whatever you want to call it. And the Marine Corps, they were there on a counterinsurgency mission. It was going to get kinetic when it needed to get kinetic, but that was not their main mission. Their main mission was pacifying, making, doing whatever they needed to do to include kinetic operations to enable the function of the nascent Afghan government. Specifically during 2-3's time there, and their predecessor, 3-3, there was the 17 September 2005 national parliamentary elections, and they wanted to make sure that those went off smoothly, that people would get up and be able to vote for who they wanted to vote for to represent them in this government that was being stood up. And they achieved that, and they achieved it through 3-3 began a series of battalion level operations that would last for a month, and they would go into places like the Korengal Valley. Many people have heard of the Korengal Valley. All throughout the Pesh Valley, Lagman Province, Nangarhar Province. 3-3 had a very large area of operation. I can't really speak. I wrote about 3-3 in Victory Point, but there are other people who are much better enabled to speak about their time there. But I will say that they had a very successful time there. They established a regular cycle of battalion level operations. Battalion level operations, the whole battalion was engaged, distributed operations, companies and platoons here and there all throughout this area that in synergy sought to disrupt anti-coalition militia activity. So it was really complicated. There's a lot of interagency involvement with different components of different aspects of the military. It was a big joint task force. They were part of a much greater JTF. 3-3 got there. It was JTF, CJTF 180 or 181. Then that switched over to Major General Kamiya around April, May of 2005, and that was CJTF 76, Combined Joint Task Force 76. And that was the senior command. Well, CFC Alpha, Combined Forces Command in Afghanistan, was senior to that. But in terms of military functionality, it was the CJTF 76. And so you asked about their mission. Their mission was just to maintain continuous presence, continuous operations, whatever they needed to do to enable the Afghan government to be stood up and to flourish. Specifically to 2-3's time, it was the 17 September 2005 national parliamentary elections, which went off fine. And subsequent to that, when the time I was there on the ground, they just wanted to continue to clean up the ACM, anti-coalition militia activity, and they continued to do that. It was just no longer, Kunar Province historically is a very restive area. Going back many years. Soviets did not have an easy time there. They had a very rough time in Kunar, Asadabad, and the Pesh Valley, and all throughout that region there. But that was their mission, and they accomplished it. So that was a little long-winded to explain that, but the short version is disrupt anti-coalition militia activity, and they achieved that.
And how were they doing that? Were they out on? Was it more presence patrols? Were they doing? Did you see while you were there, like movement to contact, trying to seek out where the enemy forces are? What was like what was kind of the tempo or operational kind of movements going on?
Very constantly outside the wire, high operational tempo, all the above, MedCap, medical capabilities operations where they would, they find out, okay, this village, they need eye drops for kids. They need gauze. Someone's got a broken arm. Someone needs to be, we've got word that this guy broke his arm. Okay, get a Black Hawk in there, get him to Bagram, fix him up and get him back. It was nation building, is counterinsurgency. It was Small Wars Manual 101. And I can't really speak from the battalion leadership level. A great guest, if he would want to do it, would be James Donnellan. He was an extremely effective leader. Also a great guest would be Robert Scott. Rob was the executive officer of the battalion. And I can't speak for them, but from what I learned from them, they studied the Small Wars Manual. That was fed down to the lowest tactical levels. We're there to embrace the population. We're there to help the population. We want to make sure that you guys are rid of these Al Qaeda, Taliban types. And we're there for you. I mean, the mission was the people. And that's kind of, bumper sticker-ish. The mission is the people. I mean, but that was the mission for 2-3, and people who were there before them 3-3 and the subsequent 1-3. The mission was to support the population and the nascent government of Afghanistan, and so to do whatever they needed to do, including counter IED work, including movements of contact. If they discovered, okay, there's a cell in this village, a lot of what happened was weapons cache raids. So they would develop intel organically, locally, and they would find this out, and they would, write up an op order. It would get approved, go do it. I mean, this happened like all the time, constantly, weapons cache raids. And so they go there, and sometimes in the course of digging up a Dishka, Dishka is I'm sure you know what a Dishka is, but just in case, it's a 12.7 millimeter anti-aircraft gun, machine gun. It's like a 50, like an M2, but it's, I think, we need a gunner here to explain the difference.
It's a little bulkier.
It's a little heavier, yeah. I think
it's a bigger gun.
I think a BMG round, a 50 BMG is 50 cal by, you do it by millimeters, it's 12.7 millimeters by, like, is it 102 or something?
I'm not
sure. And a Dishka is like 104. I can't remember. There's a gunner watching this, and he's like pulling his hair out. No, got it all wrong.
Leave it in the comments.
Yeah.
So how did these operations, this nation building, this, I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's not just like, it's good for the community when you bring out Doc and stuff and be like, hey, we can see some of your people, help them out. I mean, we medevaced. I remember medevacing multiple kids and stuff you'd be surprised by how many kids got burned. Cooking horrible. Fires, dropping boiling water on themselves and stuff, because they all cook outdoors on these fires, for people that don't understand that. And sometimes their propane tanks would explode or something like that. Yep. So we would be doing medevacs for stuff like that a lot. And then your routine stuff like a broken arm and It's a giant HA mission, humanitarian assistance mission. I mean, it was like, whether they wanted to say it or not, they were there. They had specific objectives to achieve. There were counterinsurgency objectives in nature. In the big billboard, I'm not a practitioner, so I can't say for sure, but HA, that's its thing. It's its own thing. Mm-hmm. And while they were doing all this other stuff, it was always HA mission. Like, they could be in the middle, literally, they could be in the middle of a firefight, and a kid could be, hurt, having nothing to do with the firefight. Corpsman, get over there and help the kid. Okay. And I mean, I've seen that. Yeah.
And in Iraq, not when I was in Afghanistan, but that's what they did. I mean, they were there. Their mission was the people.
Yeah, every time.
And that's the way it was that's the way it was in Iraq too.
Everybody I worked with, it was kind of the same way. It was very much we are cognizant of the local populace, and we are not trying to, we're not trying to make it a bad world for them. Obviously, there's a fight going on and stuff like that. Right. But what we can do to aid them and things, we will do. Building wells, doing all that stuff.
Oh yeah, there was a ton of well building, and that was the thing, because they were at the tactical level. There was so much of that going on. Like, oh, you need a well. I'm glad you brought that up, because they would talk to USAID. They worked with USAID over there. They worked with the State Department. It was actually, people think, oh, the Marine Corps, they're going to go kill people and blow stuff up. And, make no mistake about it. The Marines are better at that than anybody else in history, as war fighters. They are the war fighters. But they also do a lot of other stuff. And part of that is taking that expeditionary mindset and applying it in an improvised manner. Say, okay, well, they need a well. We're here to help the people. What do we do? Okay, we talk to USAID, we talk to State Department, talk to whoever we need to talk to. Oh, Navy SEALs have a generator. They're not using it. Get it. Bring it over here. They need a generator. I mean, there was a lot of that going on, and there was so much of that going on at the tactical level, and it was all supported by the battalion at up higher, but it was, as you know, in the Marines, it's an organization that really supports not so much independence or insularity, but the improvisation at the tactical level, where it's like, all right, here's your right lateral limits, here's your left lateral limits. I know you're going to push right up against these a lot of times, but if you need to do what you had to do, and you need to make up something that's not in any, field manual or any doctrine, so long as it's there to achieve the mission and you can do it safely, sometimes not so safely, do it. And they did it.
Yeah, it's very much commander's intent driven. Here's the intent. Yeah. Here's the end state that we're seeking. How do we do that the best way? And there's a lot of standard ways of doing a lot of things. But you're right though. They'll let you. A lot of commands will give you the flexibility to make judgment calls on the ground.
Exactly.
Junior leaders and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's very. They had a lot of operational latitude. That's a good way to put it. They at the tactical level.
Obviously all this humanitarian stuff's nice, but there are operations going on. So let's talk about how Red Wings came about. We can talk through that a little bit, and then go into how that went into Whalers, because these are supposed to be like one operation to set the conditions for the second operation, if I remember correctly. Right.
Yeah. So Ahmad Shah was a guy who, he was not on anybody's radar. Like as recently as the fall of 2004, nobody really even knew who he was. But he was aligned with Hezbi Islami Gulbuddin. I'm not pronouncing this guy's name right, but Gulbuddin Hekmatyar is a notorious troublemaker who's been making trouble since the late 1960s, early 1970s in Afghanistan. And he had set up shop in Peshawar, Pakistan, but he was aligned with the Taliban, and this guy Ahmad Shah was aligned with him. So he was, by extension, aligned with the Taliban. He's also aligned with Al Qaeda, and he wanted to make a name for himself in the Pesh Valley region, and he started doing that primarily with improvised explosive device attacks, IED attacks. He was based in part out of Chichal, which is in the upper Korengal Valley. And he, part of this nation building, part of this paving the way for the national parliamentary elections in September 2005 was to eradicate these types of cells. And so that's how Operation Red Wings, that was part of Operation Red Wings, was to find and locate this guy and get him to stop doing it. Preferably saying, right, you're not going to do it anymore, because 3-3 had really good lineage of success in those regards, just by maintaining presence in the Korengal Valley. They had one guy, Najmuddin. He was a much bigger target, way bigger fish to fry than Ahmad Shah had ever been. He just came out and said, I give up. There was no firefight. He just said, I give up. I'm done. It was like February of 2005. So I think that was Operation Celtics, or I can't remember a specific name of that operation. But Red Wings was developed. 3-3, they kept pushing it back. It was actually initially called Stars, named after a basketball team, the Dallas Stars, I believe, is a basketball team. And so that name got switched around. Red Wings. The operation got pushed back because Ahmad Shah wasn't going to be around. 2-3 showed up. Commands at the various special operations commands had changed over in that time frame as well. And they needed helicopter support, because for that component of the operation of finding Ahmad Shah specifically and going after him, they were going to have a sniper team plussed up, 6 guys total, extra saw gunner and a mortarman. They're going to walk in from Waterpore. It's going to be about 6.5 miles. And then they were going to need to have Marines brought in by helicopter for outer and inner and then go in. And it wasn't necessarily developed to be like a hard hit raid, but that was going to be something that was certainly planned for if they needed to be kinetic about it, if they be shooting stuff and shooting people. But they, the plan was to have an outer cordon and inner cordon and get eyes on with the sniper team. But as I explained in Victory Point, it's been some time since I've looked at the specifics of this, so I may miss a few points here. I wrote that book 15 years ago. But to get the helicopter support that they wanted, there's an individual at the helicopter support that they wanted was 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Army Special Operations Aviation. Exceptional pilots, all of Army aviation, I should say, they're all exceptionally talented, exceptionally well skilled. They all trained at the same high standards, including this, everybody from National Guard, Reserve to 160th. All Army pilots are trained to very high standards. 160th, they specialize in certain types of operations, and they specialize in nighttime, very low illumination operations. The conventional aviation at the time they weren't going to support this due to the illumination restrictions. So Battalion sought 160th support, they were owned at the time by a JSOC component, and this individual, who was a commander of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, he said, well, you can't have that unless Navy SEALs are involved. So that's how that evolved. So the Navy SEALs got involved. That plan where you're going to have 6 guys walk in, that got nixed. They were going to have SEALs come in, be dropped in by helicopter. The initial plan, once they have eyes on and they're going to drop in like a company's worth of Marines, okay, you're going to hear them comment, but then it's a company's worth. The battle space is shaped through, ISR that would have been provided by Ronin, the sniper team. And so they would have had exceptional situational awareness of what was going on, and they would have been able to help guide the helicopters in and, outline, which LZs are going to use. That they already got some good predator feeds, some good predator imagery to identify LZs. But it was, that those plans were nixed. So the Navy SEALs came in and they had their own plans, and we all know how they went. Didn't go well.
Yeah, so that was the part of the book that was really, again, I said at the beginning, it was really surprising. I didn't even realize that it was a Marine mission that had fluctuated into, having the SEALs there until you mentioned that. Another thing I remember you mentioning in the book is that, they didn't follow, once the SEAL team was brought in, they didn't follow a lot of the protocols, one of which I think you had written was prepping the LZ, like if they were going to bring in helos, dropping in artillery prior.
Can we take a quick, can we stop?
I was saying, okay, so I was mentioning the artillery support, how there was in the book,
the LZ.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book that there was a requirement at the time for any LZs to be used to be prepped before fire for like ones that are more out there, like that one was. Yeah,
they would at least have artillery registered to those, and they had a fire support plan. You're a Marine. Every time you leave the wire, you've got fire support plan, medevac plan, comm plan, comm windows. And the Marines did not have, they did not have direct involvement in planning that component of the Navy, of Operation Red Wings. That was the SEALs who planned it. However, they were able to voice their opinions, and they certainly did. And they said, look, we've got this list of TRPs, target reference points, 10-digit grids for call for fire. The artillery battery, doghouse in Asadabad at Fob Wright at the time, it was about 19 miles, I believe, from the artillery battery to Satala Sar, which 105s cannot range with regular rounds, but with RAP rounds, rocket-assisted projectile rounds, they could. And RAP rounds, I'm not an artillery expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I think they're just as accurate, the same circle error probable for whatever given distance that a non-rocket assisted round would have. I guess the CEP would be a little bit bigger because of the distance that is generated by that. But it doesn't really, from an angular aspect, it doesn't change it. It's they had a fire support plan like Marines always do, and they wanted to have them use it, but they didn't. They also had some considerations about communications, the radio that they took. They took a PRC 148 M-Biter, which is a multi-band intra tactical radio system. It's 5 watts.
It's basically a walkie-talkie.
Yeah, I mean, and you can use it for SATCOM. I mean, you can, like a cell phone. Our cell phones are 0.6 watt phones. I mean, a 5 watt. 5 watt is a fairly powerful transmitter, but it's not as powerful as a PRC 117, which is 20 watts. And I think, if you were part of Anglico, right?
Yeah, I was.
So you probably use 119 Foxtrots, 117s, probably use 150s as well.
Yeah, we used 119s kind of got phased out earlier on because they were the older model. Right. Yeah, 117s, and then you have the 117 Fox, and you have the 117 Golf. The 117 Fox is a 2-battery, I think a 20-watt radio or something like that. Pretty heavy with the radio and batteries and stuff. And then you have the 117 Golf, which is basically the exact same radio, but cut in half. It only uses 1 battery and stuff like that. I've carried both. I carried a 117 Fox in Afghanistan in 2011, and then I carried a 117. You know what? I might have had a Fox also in 2013. I can't remember. At least a Golf, but I always carried, just for reference for people, when I went out, I would, as the JTAC, I would go out with 2 152s, which is like kind of like a 148. It's a different version.
It's a 5 watt. It's a better M-Biter, right?
Yeah, it's just a Harris radio rather than the other one is a different brand. And then I would carry the 117 and a pack on my back. Just in case I didn't get comms with the 148s, or 152s, I could jump on the 117.
The 117 I've heard described as like the Cadillac. It's heavy though, and even though they're up in the mountains, part of one of the big problems was heat. And I guess I don't know anything about radios, but they would drop their cryptofill when they got overheated. Does that sound right?
Maybe. I've never had that. I mean, they've dropped fill before where they lose their. For those that don't know what that is, that's the crypto keeps it where we can talk to each other, but no one else can hear it. And if they hear anything, it'll be scrambled.
It encrypts it. It's a pretty long. It's like AES 256. Nothing's unhackable, but it's fairly
I never had issues with the 117 though. Not really. No.
But the Marines always carried the 117. It was like, that's it. We're not leaving the wire without a 117. It's nice to use a 148.
It's just a small line of sight radio, unless because you're not normally going to connect it to SATCOM. SATCOM is something where there's limited amount. It takes a little bit more finesse to get it to work and stuff because it's got to be angled correctly, the antenna and all that stuff, and you can't really move around.
Use what's called a Yagi directional antenna, and the SEALs did plan to use the 148 for SATCOM. And they had a Yagi antenna with them, a directional antenna. And, in the heat of battle, they couldn't set it up because you have to be just right. You get the azimuth just right and the elevation just right.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. Definitely not a good. Yeah,
can't just wing it. Like, okay, let me think the satellite's right there. There's like a book, right? When you've got what's the azimuth, what's the elevation, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So, yeah, like I was saying though. So those aspects, and then I think I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pulling this from memory from reading it, a decade ago. But I think you said in the book that the Marines had a QRF ready to go when the mission went down. But then when everything happened, when, they got compromised and stuff, that the SOCOM element told them to stand down because they were going to go in with their own SOCOM element rather than have the Marine QRF.
Yeah, well.
Is that correct or not?
Yeah, nobody really knew. It was a complete breakdown of C2, of command and control. It was really a complete breakdown of C3, command, control, and communication.
Okay.
A lot of times talk about military operations gone wrong, and they'll say, well, the C2 got split. C2 broke down, and really it was the C3, command, control, and communication. So the third C went down first with the team, the RNS team, the reconnaissance and surveillance team, because they didn't bring a proper radio, and they tried to rely on an Iridium phone. The Iridium has peculiarities where it ends up being what you would call a half duplex system. I had not a 9505 Alpha that they had. I had a 9555, and I was in TIC in the same area years in 2009. It wasn't really a TIC. It was just getting mortared. I was at Fob Monte, and I was trying to make a call out, and the same thing happened to them. Like, they can hear you, but you can't hear them, and then you can hear them, but they can't hear you. So it's like a half duplex. But that was the problem. And then regarding the QRF, nobody back at Bagram or at Jalalabad really knew what was going on. They didn't know when to launch the QRF, and they didn't know where exactly to launch it to. They didn't know who was going to be involved. It was just mass confusion. They just didn't know what was going on. And, you look at it, you take a step back from that, and you talk about unity of command, unity of effort, and they violated that from the start. They split the command and control because, the way it worked, the Marines didn't split the C2, involving, to get the aviation and involving special operations, the Navy SEALs. They split the C2. They said, okay, we're the supported element for phase 0 and phase 1, and then you're the supported element after that. So we're in charge of this, and then you're in charge of it at a certain point. So that's a violation of unity of command. And in terms of their specific command and control structure, they had the Marines call it a COC, Combat Operations Center. They call it a TOC, a Tactical Operations Center. Same thing, basically. And so they had two of them, one in Bagram, and they had one in Jalalabad. And the one in Jalalabad, they had elements of people at the Jalalabad Provincial Reconstruction Team waiting. They had people at JAF, Jalalabad Airfield. So it was just, we talk about distributed operations where maneuver elements are distributed all around, but you shouldn't have distributed C2. Mm-hmm. And if you do have distributed components of C2, you should have them unified in a formalized construct. That does happen. I mean, all the way up to the strategic level, we've got, like the president can go up in that E-8 Mercury and aircraft, and they call it doomsday plane or whatever, and they have it all the way down to the tactical level. The Marines, they had these MRAPs. They would go one element would be over here, but they were all unified. They all were always in contact with one another. That was not the case with Red Wings. They didn't. It was complete. It was just like throw it in a Cuisinart, blend it up. So nobody really knew what was going on at the C2 at the command level. They just didn't have any situational awareness of the RNS team whatsoever, because their communication broke down, because their communication plan did not involve what had been proven by operating in the area that the Marines knew to use, which was a 117, a PRC 117. So they did launch a QRF, but it was delayed, quite a bit delayed. They actually launched a series of QRFs, and they were more attempts to build situational awareness. And then they had during one attempt they launched 5 MH-47s, and they got in a soup of clouds because there was a thunderstorm that moved in. And there was very few people know about this, but there was almost, there's 2 tragedies. There was the ambush of the 4-man RNS team where 3 people were killed. There was the shoot down of the MH-47 Turbine 33, where 16 special operations personnel were killed. And there was almost a third one where 5 MH-47s potentially, I'm not saying that it almost happened, but it potentially could have ran into each other because they lost visual, they lost visual situational awareness of one another as they were flying, and they had to break contact, they had to break off. So now, in the hours after the initial tick, they finally were able to launch a QRF, and that involved different elements. So the MH40, a couple MH47s from Bachmann launched, and then some UH-60s at Jalalabad Airfield, and Jalalabad PRT launch. I can't remember the specifics of it. So the 60s had the Marines on them, and the MH47s had SEALs. And so they raced out to Sotalasar. They left, there was some H-64s that could have come. You asked about prepping the LZ, and this is where the prep the LZ stuff really comes into play, because the Apaches wanted to come in there first and prep the LZ, but the MH-47s, they just said, we're not going to wait. We're just going to go in. And so they did. And, had the H-64 shown up and just done a couple orbits, they wouldn't even have had a shot. They would have just, orbited. That's enemy SOP number one, is when you have tactical aircraft, guns in the sky, especially helicopters. At the time, the Apaches, and those pilots are exceptional who fly those Apaches. And at the time, they were just by having their presence there, they wouldn't have shot at anything. But they said, "We're not waiting for you to show up. We're going in." They went in. They did a couple turns. They took some Sapphire, small arms fire, and on the second round to come in to deploy the fast stroke, one of Ahmad Shah's guys got a lucky shot with an RPG and shot him down.
That's so crazy, man.
Yep.
Where were you at during all of this? Like, where are you gaining like your insights and stuff like that?
At that time, this was in late July. I was with Marines in the Mountain Warfare Training Center, and I just the only insight I had really at that time was what I saw on the news. And it wasn't until I got into Afghanistan and I really learned. And I mean, I learned by them saying, right over there, that's where this happened, right over there, while we were on a combat operation. So it was, I showed up to Camp Blessing, and, a couple of days later, we loaded into a CH-47 Chinook. There was two of them. There was Apaches overhead. There was a Boer call sign for a A-10. And they prepped the LZ real good. We were going to land up on it's TRP 12, target reference point 12, on a shoulder. Actually, it's really beautiful over there if you're in the mountains. Mm-hmm. It's Hindu Kush. And so they prepped the LZ by hitting it with 120s. It's a great example of Marine Corps improvisation. Marines don't have 120 millimeter mortars organic. They may now. I don't know, but back then they had 60 millimeter mortar, which is really an infantry system. Technically, probably isn't. An 81, which is the indirect fire system. But 81s are great, but they're nothing compared to a 120. 120 is like a little artillery, Yeah. It's like a football size. And so they prepped the LZ by hitting it for about 15 minutes. And then the Chinooks came in, we loaded up, the Marines loaded up, and they loaded up with their attached ASF, Afghan security forces, and loaded up all the MREs in the water, and we flew up and landed and got out while the Apaches orbited around. And, during this time, after they left, the Apaches left and the helicopters left, the Marines then had the objective to find where they had been, doing mortar attacks against Camp Blessing. But that's when I really started learning about Operation Red Wings, was by I wasn't right on the same mountain. It was about 5.5, 6 miles away. So, Lieutenant Kinzer, Pat, was able to point out, right over there is where this happened. Right over there is where that happened. And I was like, okay. And, I actually have a really great picture of him pointing, he's scanning the distance to his ACOG. That's the sight on an M16. They still use ACOGs on M16? They must.
Yeah.
And him, he's like, yep, that's where it is right there. That's where this guy, everything happened. And so I really was able to get a lot of, information that you wouldn't normally get.
Yeah.
It's just people who were there at the time who were maybe not looking at it directly, but they were right in that area. And so they had SA. They had really good situational awareness on what had been going on. So
yeah, so these firsthand account like interviews
Yep.
of people that were there. Did you afterwards? I know your book came out, probably not too long after. What'd you say, around 2008 timeframe? I think is when your book came out. Did you ever use like FOIA or anything like that to kind of pull any kind of reports or log entries or anything?
Nope. No, I didn't need them. I didn't need FOIAs. Everything I needed was handed to me.
Oh, okay. So they were providing that kind of information to you as well. That's cool.
Well, I got it.
Oh, okay.
I got it.
Damn reporters embedded. See what happens.
Well, I mean, I didn't get nobody did anything that they shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
There was nothing like that. It was provided to me. The information was provided to me. Leave it at that.
I want, it's such a crazy, because like I said, earlier, your account, that you got is not necessarily completely different than what you would read in Lone Survivor, but it does add a lot of context to, oh, that's why that happened, or, oh, that's why, one thing or another occurred. Which ever since that event, there's been so much debate, especially after the movie came out, and the movie was pretty kind of ridiculous, I think. What are your thoughts on the debate over like the account itself, the events that happened? I mean, I don't know. You're in a weird position where you've put out some pretty interesting information about it.
Well, the information I put out was accurate. It's what happened. I mean, there's some things that I didn't get quite right.
Like what?
How Camp Blessing got its name. I said they were part of an ODA, and he was actually a Ranger. A couple of things like that. But the big point, some of the big points were that, okay, Ahmad Shah was the right-hand man to Osama bin Laden. Nonsense. Total nonsense. He had 400 guys. Absolute nonsense. He had 8, and there's video of it. And people want to debate that. They say, well, they're not all in the video. Okay, got it. I have all the videos.
I saw I actually, that's crazy, because I remember before I joined the Marine Corps. So when did this event happen? In 2005, right? 2004, 2005. So before I joined the Marine Corps, this was like I still call it early days of the internet, but it's early days of like video sharing online and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where you could go, there were certain websites you could go to. I don't remember what's LiveLeak. I remember going on LiveLeak because you could see this different footage that was coming from overseas in the early days of the war, and there was really nowhere else that had it. And and I came across a video that the Taliban had made of where they were on the body of one of the SEALs, and they were pulling all this equipment out, pulled his foot. Man, I remember seeing that video, and this is before I had joined, and I was like, that's so fucking crazy. Like, that kind of sat with me for a while, seeing this dude, this American, having all this stuff, his ID card. They showed his ID card, and then they showed him hacking into the computer.
They had Danny Dietz's ID card, and they were rifling through Michael Murphy's belongings, and then they made a video. They showed them with their SOTMOD M4s, with their Attack 203s, and the PEC, 4 Alpha, whatever, and they had their laptop. They had the laptop with, it wasn't classified information. Well, it actually was classified information on it. They booted it. They pulled the hard drive out, and they stuck it in another computer. They did all this in Peshawar. They had a phraseolator, they had a strobe, they had all sorts of stuff that they had with them, and they got all of it. So
that was a crazy video, though. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was an insurgent video. But you were asking about some of the key elements that certain narratives applied to, certain. You're asking about certain aspects of certain narratives. Victory Point, no one has ever, to this day, identified any serious flaw with that book. I made some minor mistakes. I was very careful with all the facts and everything with that book, and I stand by it to this day that I'm not going to say flawless, but it's pretty close to flawless in terms of of what happened. Now, I didn't get into specific details because nobody can, because the people who were involved in them are dead. You can't say exactly what specifically happened with certain aspects. But I'll tell you one thing: it wasn't 400 people; it was 8.
Have you received a lot of pushback because of your book?
Oh yeah, I get death threats.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, death threats. People don't like it, but in the end, not a lot of death threats, but I get them. Most of what I got was praise because people were, they were like, yeah, I mean that your version is the realistic one. I'm in the military, not me, but I would get things like, I'm in the military. I had some, understanding what happened, and you're right on. But the people who didn't, who I got who were angry about. One guy wrote he was like a blog. Remember blogs, mill blogs? Mm-hmm. They don't really have them anymore. But I counted, I copied it and I put it on a Word document. And it was a total of about 18,000 words.
Jeez. This
guy had written about me, about how I was just, the worst thing in the world. And, I made all these, I attacked heroes and all this garbage and, made up stuff. And then other people send death threats. And then in the, years later, I still get people communicate in what I consider to be bizarre ways. Like a guy wrote this missive, this apology to me on YouTube. It's like, hey, Ed, I'm really sorry. Stuff. I'm like, who are you? Yeah. But, it was, people didn't like it. But it's, what's the old saying? You're not ready for the truth, and other people have said like, oh, it's controversial. And I'm like, well, what's so controversial about honesty? What's so controversial about just the truth? I mean, the Marines went in, they had a mission to do, they made a plan. If this didn't happen, no one ever would have heard of Operation Red Wings because, I mean, it's just.
It's one of 100 during a deployment.
It would have been just another Marine Corps operation that they went off without, why isn't, I think it's either Operation Celtics or Operation Spurs. One of the two, I think it's Celtics. That's where they got this Najmuddin guy. He wasn't a right-hand man to Osama bin Laden, but he was orders of magnitude more significant in the enemy-scape of Afghanistan at that time. And he just walked out of the mountains and said, I give up. I give up. And 3-3 did that, and you don't ever hear anything about that whatsoever. But there wasn't, Navy SEALs getting shot up and a helicopter getting blown out of the sky. And, so.
Have you ever sat down and talked with, like, Luttrell or any of the Joint Task Force people or anything like that?
Yes, I have. Yep.
How did that go?
Well, I mean, I got a lot of information. I can't get into anything specific, but I'm not done with this story.
Yeah.
There's some more stuff that is gonna, I can't say how it's gonna be revealed, but it's gonna be revealed.
Interesting.
And it's one of those things where, I mean, I've worked on a lot of projects on this, and because I wrote that book, I got in touch. A lot of people got in touch with me, and the full story needs to come out. And there's still, Victory Point is the full story. There's a few things that I just didn't have any essay on, any situational awareness on at the time, and a few components of the story, and those will be revealed at a certain point in the future. But I have talked with a lot of those people, and I've talked to them, and it went fine. Some of it was really great, and a lot of it was like, we want your help because we want the real story to be told. Because there's some of the people who are the least happy about. Well, let's put it this way. We'll talk about Extortion 17. That was a shoot down and involved Navy SEALs as well. I wrote what has been called, and which I stand by and agree with, the definitive account of the shoot down of it. I covered the people, it was the Army aircrew, and that was operating the helicopter with call sign Extortion 17. They got shot down in Tangi Valley of Afghanistan the night of 6 August 2011. So killed 30 Americans, 8 Afghans, and 1 American combat assault dog. But there was a lot of stuff in the media about that incident, and that got out, and it wasn't necessarily on the face of it, you wouldn't think, okay, that's not bad, but it really was some stuff that was really terrible because it was terribly wrong. And people got in touch with me in that story, and I was able to write the definitive account, and it went against a lot of other people's definitive accounts. And so you can apply that to Red Wings. There's people who you might not think would want to, because I didn't write this hagiographic fictional account of what happened in phase 1 of Red Wings. Phase 1 was one of the phases that was phase 0, really. That we're supposed to be doing phase 0, shaping. But a lot of those people from that world have gotten in touch with me, and it's been interesting.
What have you written about Extortion 17 that would be controversial? I mean, I know there was a ton of conspiracy theories that were flying around after that happened. It was just kind of gross, really. But was it not as straightforward as one would think?
Well, again, there's nothing controversial about the truth. However, the enemy just got really lucky.
That's what that's my understanding of the situation.
Yeah, they just got lucky. They got lucky. There was a ballistic weapon system. It was it was aimed using oral references, AURAL, oral meaning hearing, and they aimed based on where they thought that the aircraft was ingressing to, and they got lucky. They shot a volley of 3 RPGs. The second one hit, and there were people out there who made outrageous claims because they said, well, this air crew, they were not part of the 160th. They shouldn't have been supporting Joint Special Operations Command ground elements, which is nonsense because in the modern military, post Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986, and subsequent doctrine and subsequent evolution, operational evolution, not just inter-service interoperability, but inter-service type interoperability. So like conventional forces, special operations forces, special operations forces support conventional forces all the time, and conventional forces support special operations forces all the time. It's like happens all the time. Mm-hmm. And that was a big thing where people said, well, they should have been the 160th. They were flying an old helicopter. I mean, just nonsense. And then they came up with conspiracy theories like, the President of the United States. I don't even want to say.
Yeah. Let's not even give any credence.
It's so absurd. It's so nonsense. I'm not even going to say it, but And so I came out, and I, at that point in the operation, it was an Army aviation component of it. They were flying the members of Task Force Blue in as an IRF, immediate reaction force. They called it what Marines call a QRF. They call it an IRF, immediate reaction force. They were flying them in, and the enemy got a lucky shot, and that was that. They died. It was a terrible tragedy, but there's a big backstory on Army aviation, on that specific unit, on how they worked with the how they worked with Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC elements, how they supported them, who these pilots were, who the individual flight crew members were, where did they come from, and so you learn a lot about Army aviation, which is amazing. I strongly urge all people to learn about Army aviation. It's a really fascinating and wonderful world. It's great. And, just like I urge people to learn about the Marine Corps. And so, there's that aspect of it. There's how modern wars are fought, service interoperability, all these different aspects, how, integration of intel, how these operations evolve and how they're planned, how they're executed.
Yeah, we're really living in a more of a joint world, where we try to integrate as much as possible, have that seamless integration, because we understand that, certain elements have capabilities that other elements don't. They complement each other, and they need to be able to work together. I mean, I obviously I bring it up a lot on the show. That's why Anglico, the whole point of Anglico is for integrating Marine MAGTF fire support assets and stuff into an adjacent unit, be it the Army, be it a foreign force, be it a SOCOM unit. That's their role, and stuff like that is becoming more and more.
I mean, it's not sort of. It is. I mean, it is fully. I mean, the Department of Defense is a fully integrated you know, joint system. And like you said, it continues to evolve, and it continues to get better. And it is an interesting study from 2005 to 2011. One of the things I explained with Extortion 17 shoot down is that it was a horrible tragedy, but it also opens the window to illuminate just how well the United States military has evolved to work not just inter-service, but inter-service or force type integration. So you've got conventional forces integrated with special operations forces. Wasn't so great in Operation Anaconda and Operation Red Wings and some of these others. There was a lot of friction. And by the time 2011 came around, it was much more functionally evolved. I don't know if it has been doctrinally evolved, if the doctrine is there, but certainly functionally, operationally, how they're like, yep, they get supported all the time. They support, different force types. And, all of the joint evolution came, of course, with Operation Eagle Claw in April of 1980. And that's that terrible tragedy led to the Admiral Holloway report in 1980 or 1981, and that led to the Goldwater-Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act of 1986. Yeah. And so that's when service chiefs no longer were commanding their respective services. They were in charge of organizing, training, and equipping. The command went to geographic combatant commanders, or went to combatant commanders, unified combatant commands and geographic combatant commands. So like CENTCOM, SOCOM, SOUTHCOM, UCOM, and then, JSOC would be a sub-unified combatant command. But that was a big, huge change, and that made a lot of things much better. And then as we've evolved, again, I'm not aware of specific doctrine, but functionally, operationally, that same type of integration that we've seen, and gets better and better every year, every day, between different service types. We also see that now between different services. We now see between different force types. So
yeah, I mean, and people that don't understand or think that like, oh, these guys are JSOC or these guys are whatever level, tier 1, whatever you want to say.
Right.
They only fly with the 160th. That's just mistaken, because it all really comes down. It all comes down to availability. They have a schedule just like everybody else, and they understand that the 160th may not necessarily be needed for every kind of mission. They're a very specialized unit with very special skills and are the best at what they do. But you don't need the best guy at everything for every mission. They just can't do it. It's just not enough of them to do it, to be able to do that. So it's spread load across the other forces. It's
splitting semantic hairs, but you said a word that is very appropriate. You said specialized, as opposed to special. There's a difference there between specialized and special. And all Army aviators, they can't fly, unless they're fully qualified to, there's high standards, whether they're, a W-2 in a guard unit, or whether they're a W-5 in the 160th warrant officers. They all operate at very high standards. 160th, they're specialized. They're not special in that they're like better people or whatever than anybody else. They train to a very specialized. They train for very specialized procedures that other people in other they just have very specialized tasks. So someone in the reserves or the Army National Guard or Big Army active, they can all be trained to these types of missions. It's just they don't have the money and they don't have the need for it. So so SOF, as the other thing too is SOF, Special Operations Forces. They used to just be used for very specific tasks. They're especially during Operation Enduring Freedom and OIF. They got used a lot for what normally would have been, just conventional forces operations.
Yeah.
So, and which is fine, but like you said, there's resource management at all levels. And there's no reason to, what's the point of having a team that's made for flying an MH-60 DAP, direct action penetrator, where they put guns and stuff and rocket pods on a UH-60, and to use it sort of as an Apache gunship for infill of units. Why you don't need that when you've got gobs of Apaches for this? You may have a specific need where you want to have that capability. If you don't need it, then why even call them up? You're not just going to say, well, we're in SOF, so we have to use SOF aviation. That's nonsense.
Yeah. No, it's 100%. That'd be like us, being like, oh, I'm not going to call in fire to the Army artillery. Like, they're Army. We have Marine artillery. It's like, it's whatever works best. I think the joint world, or I think the joint, acceptance, I guess, the more and more like working together amongst other services and stuff has come along. Probably a lot of it probably has to do with these deployments overseas, and as these junior leaders are getting having interactions with people from other forces, lieutenants from the Navy, lieutenants from the Marines, interacting with each other in joint command centers or whatever. And as they become more senior, they see the valuableness of like bringing in these other people, that from that experience that they had. I think that probably helped kind of bring the joint world into a better perspective, or better, I don't know, being utilized better, because all these guys grew up through the global war on terror, and it was 20 years long, and they had exposure to other services, and they saw like, oh, well, the Marines can bring in the LAVs, or the Army can bring in these Apaches, or and they see that there's multiple capabilities that services have that maybe other ones don't, and makes it more, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, it's a great point, and I think a point that is overlooked a lot of times is culture.
Yeah,
and there's every component of the Department of Defense, every service, they've got their own unique culture. And the Marine Corps has a unique culture. And some people don't like it, but almost everybody will agree, that the Marines are fond of saying we were joint before joint was cool, because they have all components for operational function. They've got their own Air Force. They've got artillery. They used to have tanks. They've got, and they continue to have it. They've got their hands on all types of, they don't have nuclear strategic missiles, but that's, they don't need that. They've got all different types for all different types of weapon systems, or systems, engagement. We'll call them engagement systems, cyber, information, kinetic systems. For all different domains, they own these things, right? So, and they've got their culture that in part has been forged by that. The Army has a certain culture, the Air Force has a certain culture, and the Navy has a certain culture. And I think it's really important that despite this joint evolution, and it's continuously evolving, that these services do not lose. You don't want it washed. You don't want it sort of, I think it's good to have cultural differences that are appropriately incorporated into, a greater joint world. But I certainly would hope that the Marine Corps, and I don't think it ever will, lose its culture. It's a unique culture, and I would hope that the Air Force doesn't lose their culture, and the Navy and the Army, because these cultural differences are synergizing effects when they're put together in a joint capability, in a joint construct, and you, like you intimated, it absolutely has a synergizing effect for military capability. That's something that is difficult to explain specifically why. It's case by case. Like, oh yeah, we were working with the Navy, and they had this, Marine Corps lieutenant colonel, and he was able to do an ad hoc explanation of like what a MAGTF is, and the Air Force guy kind of knew what it was, and they built an operation right then and there. based on these different cultures, not just different capabilities that each individual service brings to a campaign. So that's very important.
Yeah.
Sometimes I hear about the dilution. There's a concern. I have a concern about in the future. There are always some in the past, in the Marine Corps' history. There's this term unification, they say, which means getting rid of the Marine Corps, unifying it with the Army, and that's a terrible idea. Not because the Army's terrible. The Army's great. But the Marine Corps needs to be the Marine Corps with all its, multi-domain capabilities, its multi-domain mindset, expeditionary mindset, and their culture. Culture is unique. It's like the Army's culture is unique. And when you take these two disparate cultures and put them together, there might be little clashes here and there, but in the end, I think historically, that it's good. It's a synergizing effect, just like the combination of a mortar and an Army artillery unit with Marine mixed section, Cobra Huey mixed section, working in those two indirect fires working together is a synergizing effect. So it's a little bit more difficult to explain why. When you talk about two cultures working together, it's a case by case thing. You can't just sort of make a diagram out of it like you can with artillery and close air support components, but it happens.
Yeah, so. I think the big thing, the big divergent cultures comes from mission sets. The Marine Corps isn't supposed to be a land force that comes in and occupies and stuff like that. The whole thing is supposed to be expeditionary. Get in, get out, do whatever we're supposed to do and get out of here. Bring everything to bear. The Marine Expeditionary Unit comes in with a battalion reinforced. So you're talking 1,500, 1,600 people. So an infantry battalion with all the supporting assets, air, artillery, all like we were talking about, and are ready to occupy an area for 30 days or whatever without any kind of reinforcements, until whatever else can come, get ready to come and support. And you have to have a certain mindset to be able to accomplish a mission like that, because once you hit the beach or whatever with the MEU, and if it's 30 days or whatever, then you go like, we got to be self-supporting for 30 days, and that means we got to bring everything to bear that we can in the most economical fashion, because we can't sit here and just blow all of our ammo off in like a couple days, because there may not be a resupply for a while.
Although a lot of Marines would love to do that.
Oh yeah. Oh, of course.
Not because they want to have a sustainment issue, but they just like shooting.
Yeah. Well, who doesn't like shooting, right? It's much less fun to shoot in the real world now that I have to pay for my own ammo. It's
yeah, I bet.
It's a little bit of a bummer out here.
I bet.
Before we we're coming up on like a 2-hour timeline. I do want to touch on whalers, though. I don't think we really got into it too much. So let's can you kind of give us an overview of that and how that went for 2-3?
Right. So Operation Whalers was a battalion level operation that was planned and executed by 2nd Battalion 3rd Marines in RC East, Regional Command East in Afghanistan in August of 2005. It kicked off around mid-August. The objective was the disruption of anti-coalition militia activity with a specific focus on Ahmad Shah. Now, technically, it was a joint operation. However, it was as organic to the Marine Corps as they possibly could make it. They ended up essentially, the overall plan, and it was a very well-made plan, was to movement to contact in 5 valleys. So there was the Chalke Valley, Narang Valley, Shuriek Valley, Chalke, Narang, Shuriek, and the Korangal Valley. So we had 4 valleys. I said 5. Sorry. And basically they were going to squeeze out Ahmad Shah's little army. This was after Red Wings. It was a few weeks after Red Wings. There was no special operations involved with whalers. They essentially built what would be most appropriately termed an SP MAGTF. They did not call it that. It was not doctrinally an SP MAGTF, but it was, again, the culture is a good example of the culture. The the culture of improvisation, which the Marines, they have it. They can wield that sword when they need to wield it and when it's appropriate, and they did for whalers. They came in, they needed, they didn't have an ACE, air combat element. Like when you have a MAGTF, a Marine Air Ground Task Force, which is really kind of mislabeled in my opinion. It's to be called a Marine Multi-Domain Task Force. They have an air combat element. They didn't have that because they deployed as a component to a greater joint task force under CJTF 76. But they wanted to accomplish their goals with their emphasis on completely disrupting Ahmad Shah's capabilities at the time. They ended up doing that. But they didn't have their own organic air, so they had to work with the Army, and that worked great. They had to work with the Army in terms of utility, UH-60s. They had to work with the Army in terms of air support. Now, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but that's fine. The Marine Corps looks at aviation firepower as an indirect fire, meaning that they need an observer, and it's to be directed by a ground observer. The Army doesn't have close air support. They have what's called close CCA, close combat attack. They may have changed the name in the years. It's been some time since I've looked at this. So Apaches are like maneuver elements. They're able to engage on their own. You can maybe talk about control types 1, 2, and 3. This is a culture thing with the Marine Corps. In order to utilize the Apaches that the Marines used for Operation Whalers, they used what was called Type 3 control. So basically, again, trying to get out of the weeds now. In terms of their planning for Operation Whalers, they had all these different components, including Army artillery, Army aviation logistical support, UH-60s, medevac support, dust off, call sign dust off, and then Apaches used for close air support, even though the Army doesn't consider it close air support. It was used as CAS. They also used Air Force elements, A-10s, call sign Boar. And they conducted their operation, and they conducted it just like the Marine Corps is supposed to conduct it. They planned, and they planned again, and they never stopped planning till the thing was over with. They continuously, their initial plan had, for instance, they thought that movement to contact, that's the term basically, movement to contact, just in case anybody, do you want to explain movement to contact? You're a Marine, you can explain it better than I can.
It's when you're in an area, it's possibly an enemy held area or an unknown area, and you're usually you're investigating for enemy forces. You're trying to run into them, and not necessarily to fight and defeat them that day, but to gain some information like, hey, here's where they're hanging out at. You're
moving until you are in contact, visual contact, kinetic contact, or some type of contact with the enemy forces, and at that now you've got a point of friction, and at that point you're going to exploit that. So they expected the movement to contact. The point of friction was going to be in the Korengal Valley. It wasn't. It was in the Chalke Valley. So Marine Corps culture, it's like, all right, make a new plan. Not make a new plan, adapt the plan. Here we go. We're going to make, and that's constantly changing. So these, up at higher headquarters, they were very busy making sure that everybody on the ground, it was the actual element that made contact with Ahmad Shah's was Fox Company, and they had, I can't remember again, I wrote the book, but I believe it was about a 48-hour, on and off firefight. But they were continuously supported in this, what I call a special purpose MAGTF environment, Joint Task Force, enabled SP MAGTF. And they killed a lot of Ahmad Shah's guys, and they ran him out of the country. And he was done. His cell was done. The cell that had unleashed all the tragedy, Red Wings, tragedy that was enabled by poor planning, that he, it was a cartridge loaded into the chamber by poor planning, and the trigger was pulled by Ahmad Shah's guy, if you want to make that type of analogy. And the Marine Corps being Marines, they made a very, very detailed plan that involved anything and everything and any type of contingency. And they were able to adapt and apply these adaptations on the fly as they were moving along. And it was a success. It was a classic Marine Corps, modern Marine Corps, I would say, because they were using joint assets. The classic Marine Corps, the classic Marine Corps is they're on a ship with the Navy, they get dropped off, and everything is Marine Corps. But that doesn't happen these days. They don't have their own satellites and that kind of thing. So, but they had Apache helicopters, gunships. They had A-10s. They had 105 millimeter artillery at Asadabad. They had 81s that they carried with them, and they made it work. Yeah, and it's a great study of modern Marine Corps. It's kind of, I think, just about the best example of the modern Marine Corps in terms of kinetic operations. We were talking about information operations, and we're talking about previously talking about coin counterinsurgency. This was basically all kinetic. There was med caps that happened. There was outreach, and there was working with the government of Afghanistan units, not the Kandex, but the ANA, Afghan National Army. But when you just look at the part of it of the kinetic fight and how they were supported and how they integrated other joint assets, I mean, you just don't get a better example of a modern Marine Corps operation than whalers. People say, well, what about this in Iraq? That was not mountainous terrain. That's the other aspect to this. They're in the mountains.
Yeah. Which
adds a whole different dimension. I know urban combat, MOUT, military operations and urban terrain. There's all sorts of, that's complex and compartmented terrain, but it's not mountainous. You've got physiological components and you've got physical components of the mountains, and there's all sorts of complexities that are then introduced. So it's really a phenomenal example.
Yeah, during your journey here, when you got invited to come out to Afghanistan, and then when you got there, what was your plan? Was your plan to write a book about just like covering 2-3, or were you just doing normal war coverage, see what kind of happens? What was the catalyst of you writing Victory Point, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I wanted to document a Marine Corps battalion of war and do it through writing and through photography. And I went out there as an independent. I paid for my way out there. Once I was there, I didn't pay for the fuel and the helicopters or the MREs, but I was there as technically I was an independent, embedded author and photographer. It was also a business venture, which is something I don't really talk about that much, but you're asking, so I'll explain it. Yeah, I paid for all that stuff. Just like I paid for my computer. I didn't have a desk to go back to at XYZ newspaper or media company. I was my own media company. On my badge it said Ed Darack Photography. That was the name of my business. And so I owned all that material and all the photographs, and I still own it, and all the work. And so that has allowed me to stay with this story, Red Wings, for so long. Normally, when you are, I don't like to say I'm a journalist because I've never been trained classically as a journalist, but I am able to undertake journalistic endeavors and accomplish them at a very high level, I believe, because I'm able to spend so much time, and getting facts straight is so important to me. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it takes a long time to do that, and it's expensive, and you got to do it, and you make the commitment and you do it. And I made a commitment to Rob Scott and Tom Wood in the conference room at Mountain Warfare Training Center in March of 2005. He said, "You come along with us, just tell the story accurately." Okay, I'll do that. And I've been doing it for 18 years. So, Victory Point is, I will say, it's came out in April, I think 2009. So we're 14 years. I think at this point, I'm going to say it's a great book. It's, not because of me, a lot of wonderful people who assisted me in making sure I got that story right. And I did. It's a great story, especially whalers. I encourage everybody to read that because of whalers. You really want to learn about the modern Marine Corps. It's like, yep, modern Marine Corps, they do HA great. They, humanitarian assistance, counterinsurgency, but, Marines, their primary function is the kinetic fight, and they did it. And they, I shouldn't say the primary function, but they're trained, organized, trained, and equipped for the kinetic fight.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, man. Well, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it in 2009. And like I said offline, that I've always recommended it to anyone that, has mentioned Lone Survivor or anything like that, because I thought it was a really good addition to, the information there. Where can people find your book? Where can they find you on like social media, man?
It's on Amazon. You can just Google my name, Ed Darack, Darack, and all my contact stuff pops up for Instagram and stuff. I'm not a huge social media person, but I do post stuff. I used to post stuff on LinkedIn a lot. I used to think of LinkedIn as Facebook for people over 30, but it's really amazing. It's a really great. You can organize all your life, all your life's work. You can put it there, and so you can get all your stuff there. I love LinkedIn, but I put, I have that. I've got Instagram. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, I've got my email. But Amazon, you can get my books. I wrote a book about the same battalion, about their deployment to Iraq, called Warriors of Anbar. I produced a photography book called War Moments. Some of my, my best images. So it's interesting. I do as a photographer and also as a writer, write magazine articles, write books, and publish images. So it's been got my hands on a few different media components.
Yeah.
But that's how people can learn more if they want to find out.
Sweet, man. Everybody check that out. Make sure to go to my website, jcrimmergraphics.com. I'm on Instagram at Former Action Guys, at Former Action News. And Ed, again, man, I really appreciate the conversation, man.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.